afternoon, everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Wearing some green here in honor of that. My name is Sean Hadley, and I am the co-founder and chief operating officer of the Beyond Earth Institute. I want to wish everyone a very warm welcome to our program, which today focuses on the policy challenges of the emerging commercial habitat market. I also want to express our sincere thanks to our amazing group of experts gathered here who will be introduced very shortly. But before that, let me give you a few housekeeping items and some Beyond Earth updates. This is a 90-minute program. And while we, of course, are very excited that you're here, we'd also love for you to come to some of our other programs. And let me give you just a couple of things that are upcoming. Number one is that we're hosting the policy track at the National Space Society's International Space Development Conference on May 27th in Arlington, Virginia. That is going to be a 5-hour event and will focus on topical issues in space policy, especially those that are looking at the human presence in space. We know it's going to be very exciting. We hope to see you there. We also have some breaking news for us, which is we've just confirmed that Beyond Earth will be partnering with the University of Arizona to host a fall symposium on space policy in Washington, D.C. on October 13th. So save the date. We're going to have more details for that shortly in the next few weeks. But for now, keep that in mind, October 13th in Washington, D.C. with the University of Arizona. And of course, our next webinar will be held in April. We're still nailing down the final date, but that's going to feature our Beyond Earth team member, Laura Forzik, who will lead a discussion on her new book, Becoming Off-Worldly, Learning from Astronauts to Prepare for Your Spaceflight Journey. And I know that's going to be a fantastic conversation. Really looking forward to that. So hopefully you can join us for our April webinar as well. And of course, we can only make all of this possible with your support. And we always ask that if you can, please make a financial donation to us. Take a moment, go to our website at beyondearth.org and make a donation. So thank you for all of your support. And why do we do this? You know, at Beyond Earth Institute, our focus is on policy solutions for the long-term human presence in space. We're not just thinking about what we need to do now, but what we also need to do in the longer term towards humanity's next step. Our focus is on technological readiness, worldwide public support, related public policy enactment. And our vision is simple. We see a future with economically vibrant communities living and working beyond planet Earth. We want to make this happen by helping to form a legal and policy framework that brings this vision to reality. But why do we do it? Because we're reminded more and more each day that our future lies in space. You know, even though we are here today to discuss the exciting and hopeful opportunities for humanity, you know, we can't ignore that we live in a perilous world, you know, felt most strongly right now by the situation going on with the people in Ukraine, you know, and we want to acknowledge and hope for their peace. But we hope that this vision that we're having in this discussion today, that will be a vision of peace and exploration in humanity's future. So that's what we really want to focus on. And that's what our dream is here at Beyond Earth. And, you know, regarding the commercial habitat market, I mean, we are so grateful to, you know, the ISS for showing us the possibility of these dreams. We've had permanent human occupancy for almost 22 years. We've learned so much about living and working in space. You know, we've done the proof of concept. We've done the feasibility study. It's time to expand so the rest of humanity can fully participate. So I am really looking forward to this conversation because I know I'm just really excited to hear all the developments and all of the questions, and our distinguished speakers are really going to help us to clarify these ideas, to discuss these challenges, of which there are many, and show us the reality on how we can make this happen. So because I'm excited, I'm going to sit back and introduce our moderator who's going to handle the first part of our program, and that is Courtney Stad. And Courtney Stad is Vice President here at Beyond Earth Institute. And look, Courtney Stad doesn't need a long introduction, but he's had 40 years of experience and, you know, broad mix, senior government leadership, corporate executive jobs. He's been involved in Pathfinder Space Industries, and he has focused so strongly on the removal of policy and regulatory barriers for the emergence specifically of a commercial space marketplace. Multiple leadership positions, U.S. Department of Commerce, DOT, the White House. He's worked directly for 3 NASA administrators. Courtney's experience is immense, and we are grateful to have him as part of our team. And Courtney, I'm going to kick it over to you, introduce our distinguished speakers. And I, again, want to thank all of you here for being with us here at Beyond Earth's webinar on the commercial habitat marketplace. So Courtney, please take it away.
All right, Sean, thank you very much. And thank you for those overly kind introductory comments. I appreciate it. This section of the discussion we're about to have will be between me and a much valued friend and colleague, Phil McAllister, who is Director of Commercial Spaceflight Vision at NASA. If you want more details on his illustrious biography, just go to our website and you'll see it. It's suffice it to say that Phil McAllister's trajectory has very much been aligned to all the major milestones in commercial cargo, commercial crew, the space station, and as he'll get into in a few moments, he's got a lot of moving parts that fit into his portfolio. And we could not imagine a better person, right time, right place, to help set the tone for this timely and critical discussion that we're about to embark on. So Phil, thank you for your taking some time from, I know, a crazy and busy schedule. By the way, before I begin, I just want to remind our audience that we'll be reserving your much valued questions for the end of the session, so roughly about 3-ish or so. And also, as open as I know, Phil and my other good friend from NASA, Dr. Alex McDonald, are very open to addressing any and all germane questions. We do ask that, as interested as you are regarding Russia and the ISS, they're really not authorized to speak to it, and their leadership has been pretty public about their views on the topic and can be easily assessed, again, on the NASA website or directly from their folks in communications. Phil, I recall that, in fact, I very much recall when you made the transition from private sector to NASA headquarters 17 years ago, which was quite amazing. It seems like, I'm sure you, it may feel like 50 years, but for me, it feels just yesterday. As I mentioned, the arc of your career really has tracked so closely the emergence of the space marketplace. And now that you're division director for commercial space, as I say, it's so fitting to start with you and hear your views on the status of the emergence of these commercial space habitats in Earth orbit, whose executives will hold forth on their respective initiatives in a few moments. Just wonder if you could start, Phil, by describing the origins and the evolution of the commercial LEO development program.
Okay. I don't want to go back too far, but I think in terms of the current era of partnerships within NASA, it really did start with commercial cargo. We had partnerships before then. If you guys remember Dreamtime, they were going to digitize all NASA archival footage, the X-33, VentureStar partnership, Wake Shield. Most of those failed or were not successful. Maybe that's a better way to put it. In my opinion, because we put too much responsibility over on the private sector. And we didn't at NASA, in my opinion, have a really good feel for what a partnership looks like, and the fact that you need to hit that sweet spot between what will work for your private sector partner and what will also work for the government. And I think that was one of the advantages when I transitioned into NASA. As you mentioned, Courtney, I had about 20 years of experience in the private sector, so I knew how they thought, kind of what the culture was in some of these companies, what incentivizes them. And that allowed us early on in the commercial cargo program to set up a partnership that I think was appropriately balanced between risk and reward and resources and technical capability between the two entities, so that we really did hit that sweet spot. And I think that was the real, in my opinion, beginning of this current sort of age of partnership and commercial activity in the United States. It was 2005, we started. It was a program that I like to say kind of flew under the radar screen. We had a very big program of record, the Constellation program. So COTS was only a $500 million program and didn't really attract a whole lot of attention, which gave us a lot of autonomy.
I was about to say, that's probably a good thing.
Yes, we didn't need the big landing party that normally comes with NASA at that point. We really needed the partners to have the freedom to innovate and come up with new ways of doing business. We did not dictate launch vehicle, launch pad, kind of propulsion structures, that was all the decision making of the partners. That's a huge change. For 40 years of NASA's history, we had been in charge, making the decisions, and private sector would just implement them. And in a partnership model, you are sharing those sorts of things. And since the companies were owning the intellectual property, it made sense for them to not only make the decisions, but also contribute to the financial success of these companies, these initiatives. And that gave them skin in the game, which kept them in when things started getting tough, as they always will. So it was kind of nice being under the radar screen in that time. And then we doubled down, as I like to call it, with Commercial Crew. At that time, if you remember, in 2010, commercial cargo hadn't even flown. But yet we had hit a series of milestones that within the federal government, within the policy making circles here in DC, it had increased the confidence level associated with that kind of partnership. And then the Augustine panel came out and kind of really gave an endorsement to Commercial Crew, and then it was in the budget. And I had a lot of feedback from our stakeholders about how this was maybe not the best idea. And the corner really turned, Courtney, in my opinion, in 2012 when SpaceX flew that first mission to the ISS. So that was the start. And I think we needed cargo, obviously, but subsequently, SpaceX and Orbital Sciences, now Northrop Grumman, they never sold a complete cargo mission to low Earth orbit to anybody other than NASA. And I think looking back on it, maybe we were a little naive, but if you're going to have a cargo mission, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? You need people up there to do the experiments, and then you need a destination for them to do it in. And so now we've got cargo. We've just gotten crew certified. We'll get Boeing over the finish line here soon. And now we're on to destinations. And I'm so excited about this possibility. We're putting all three of those the legs of those stools together. And I think when you have cargo, crew, and destinations, NASA can really push most of LEO activity onto the private sector, and that will focus us on to the moon and Mars while still having a toehold in low Earth orbit. So that's the way I see things going. That's sort of the history in a nutshell for human spaceflight partnerships and how we got to destinations, I would say, Courtney.
Yeah. So given your history, given the learning curve we've gone through, did you feel with the proposals now that they've been awarded by the agency, the Blue Origin, of course, we've got Dr. Wagner, Northrop Grumman, NanoRacks, Adrian from Voyager Space, and you've got the separate emergence of Axiom Space. Where you're sitting, has industry stood up? In your judgment, what impressed you, if I may put it that way, the most about the proposals that were submitted?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we got a significant interest from the commercial LEO destinations funded Space Act Agreement proposals that came in. 11 companies, which really gave us confidence that our acquisition strategy was good, our partnership strategy was good. If you only get one or two bidders, you may have to question it. But we got 11 credible concepts. With enough time and money, I think probably all of them could have been successful. They weren't breaking the law of physics or anything like that. So very, very pleased that at this point in time, we have 11 companies, or somewhere around 11, maybe not all of them, but close to 11 companies that are technically and financially capable with concepts to do commercial LEO destinations. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that would not have been the case, Courtney. And these are companies that are looking for business opportunities. They're not necessarily looking for this to be a government contractor only. They're not just building another space station, they're creating an industry. And so that, of which we are going to be part of, but what I keep telling our CLD partners is, don't look to the government to close your business case. You have to close that business case on business opportunities. We will be your anchor tenant at some level and some percentage of your utilization, but we want fixed price contracts. We're going to have a defined set of services that we want to buy. And that's what has impressed me the most, the diversity of the kinds of concepts that we got. And now the portfolio, which I think you'll show a slide in a little bit, very, very pleased about the portfolio. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, but together as a portfolio, I really am very confident that more than one, at least two, hopefully, will come to fruition and soon, hopefully before the end of this decade, which is amazingly fast if you think about it, we will be able to purchase services for destinations in low Earth orbit.
Those of us who've been in this business for 40 plus years, it can't come fast enough, but point taken. Arnie, I wonder if we could show that chart that Phil very kindly provided. It's coming up, Phil, I think. Yeah, here we are. Want to talk to it for a second, Phil? You have already, but is there anything that...
Yeah, I can tell you that we had the kickoff meetings to the Funded Space Act agreements that we did. That's with Blue Origin, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman in January. And the people in those companies, they were like vibrating with excitement, Courtney. And that, I got to tell you, it reinvigorated me. Being at NASA and being in DC, that can be a grind sometimes. But to see these people that were so just ready to just come out of the gate like a thoroughbred horse racer and get involved and start working the maturity and designing their systems, it was just really great. And of course, Axiom had been doing that now for almost 2 years. We awarded that contract a couple of years ago. So they have gotten pretty far along in their development. They just had their, you can see some of the stats there. They had their preliminary design review, their HAD module last summer. They're going to come up with a CDR, or the critical design review, this summer. And you can see some very, very aggressive schedules. 2027, it's 5 years from now. 2029. I mean, those are, we've sort of gotten used to seeing very aggressive schedules, and I think that's a good thing. But these definitely are going to have challenges, and we're going to have to work through those. But as a portfolio, you can see we've got inflatables, we've got cylindrical metallic structures, we've got different kinds of power capability, different markets that they are also eyeing. Some of these will be better for some markets, some will be better for others. And I think that's just what you want to have at this early stage of the life cycle. Got to let them fight it out, see which ones markets really want come to fruition, where they can get the best investment, because those investors are going to be very savvy about the markets. And so you can just see across the board a variety of concepts that, and we like to see that at this stage. We had 4 or 5 in the very first round of Commercial Crew, and they kind of weeded out as time, and then we ended up with 2. I hope to see a similar sort of situation with destinations, but we'll see how it plays out. Depends on funding, depends on their technical performance, depends on a lot of things. We'll see how that plays out.
The younger people in the audience who just joined this community the last couple of years, it's phenomenal to see what progress has been made. It's absolutely phenomenal. To help also set the tone for the ensuing conversation, you've been so part of the transition to more of a commercial oriented agency. And I just wonder what you see. Again, you've alluded to some of it, but I wonder if we could dig a little deeper into some of the policy and perhaps even some of the regulatory issues that you foresee as NASA shifts from being the primary contractor, owner, manager, to more of that customer relationship that we've seen on the commercial satellite side, for example, and now clearly in the habitat, the commercial habitat domain as we shift to it. So what do you still see as some of the outstanding issues, at least maybe give us a few appetizers as you see it?
Yeah, so I would say we're not ready, Courtney. We have some heavy lifting that needs to happen on the regulatory side in order to make this vision a reality. From NASA's standpoint, our vision, 2 weeks ago, I bought a ticket on American Airlines. I went down to JSC, I did my business, came back. There's a lot of people on that aircraft, but NASA didn't do anything to check the aircraft airworthiness or anything like that. We hope, my vision, and I think NASA's vision, is long-term. That's what will happen in low Earth orbit. I will buy a ticket. I'll be on a spacecraft with other people. I'll go up to the LEO destination. I'll do my work. I will come back. And NASA will not be involved in the regulations of that industry. That is where we are trying to get to. It might take another maybe generation of systems. We are not ready for that at all today, Courtney. What people don't realize, I think, is the amount of work that NASA has done to enable cargo and crew. We acquire the spectrum. We allow them to use not a trivial amount of government resources. We arrange for the DoD rescue forces. All that has to be done without NASA. And we want to get out of that business. And the rest, we need a whole of government approach. That's kind of the catchword that you might hear more and more, those in industry. We need a whole of government approach to this, because NASA is not going to do this in the future, and we shouldn't be doing this in the future. We're not a regulatory agency. We're an exploration agency. And yet we've had to, because there haven't been any other agencies and we have a mission to perform, we've had to fill in those blanks. We filled in with our human rating requirements and our certification strategies, but that is not what we should be doing. We need those physical and financial capital so that we can do the moon and Mars, the things that we may not have an economic incentive for. In a lot of ways, Courtney, let's go back to memory lane. It reminds me of the early 80s when Deke Slayton was going around with his Conestoga launch vehicle concept. Right. He had to go to 7 federal agencies, all of which had to say yes, any one of which could say no, and he was not going to be able to launch if they did. We just had this patchwork of regulatory functions. And then we stood up FAA, Office of Commercial Space Transportation, that did the licensing, and I think that was a key thing in the overall regulatory. I think you were involved in some of that early stuff.
I very much so was, yeah. And I'm about to, if you don't mind, Mike, just adding something there. I wish it was only 7. I was actually a competitor of the great late Deke Slayton with another rocket company, and he and I were dealing with 15 or 16 agencies, all of whom could say no. And of course, that ultimately did lead to a lead agency model. A lot of antibodies came out of the government system, fighting us at that point. But you're right. I think that is in many ways a good model for hopefully where we're going in the future.
Once AST was established, it became very clear, right? As an investor, the risk goes down considerably. When you have one-stop shop, you know what that license is, you know what the requirements are. We need a similar thing today, I believe, Courtney, in moving, as NASA moves, we can't have a void. We can't have this, vacuum, no pun intended, when we sort of pull out of this, but we very much want to do that. So I think there's some heavy lifting. I think that's where Beyond Earth has a role. I think everybody in the industry has a role, and we all are going to need to make that happen, because I can tell you we are committed to extricating ourselves from that kind of function going forward.
Going to hold you to that, Phil.
Today.
Thank you. Phil, thank you very, very much. This was exactly what we were hoping to focus on as our preamble to the next segment of this conversation. We thank you in advance for holding on and participating in the discussion that's about to ensue. So at this point, let me throw it back to Sean, Steve, right? Sean, thank you very much. I'm going to go on mute and look forward to the next segment.
Thank you very much, Courtney. Great job. And Phil, again, my strong appreciation for this background. I mean, we can already see where the 3 legs of the stool are starting to come into place. And this is quite exciting. I mean, I think if we try to outline today all the innovations that a robust commercial habitat market would have, we'd be selling ourselves short. So this is an exciting development, and I'm really looking forward to how big these innovations will be. And I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that in our next panel, which I am also pleased to have Steve Wolf join us as our moderator. Steve, I have to tell you, as the president, and you are very humble. It's one of the things I admire about you. You call yourself a co-founder, but I call you the founder of the Beyond Earth Institute, because it is truly your leadership and your inspiration that has brought all of us together and all of our talent here for this panel today, and also in the other activities we've been engaged in. So your history is immense. Your books are stellar, no pun intended, and your work, especially in setting up, the commercial space settlement, has been very well established. And throughout your career in DC, I do not want to make you feel too good, right, because of your humility, but you have such an excellent reputation, and I am so glad that you are serving with us as the president of the Beyond Earth Institute and as its founder. I'm really looking forward to the conversation you're going to have with our distinguished panelists today. So Steve, please take it away.
Thank you, Sean. I wasn't quite expecting that introduction, but thank you. And I just to take a moment, I did want to acknowledge, I should acknowledge that that Sean has been on this journey with me from the very beginning, and we are of like minds. And I would not be Beyond Earth would not be where we are at the moment without him. And similarly, Courtney Stead has been a tremendous support to our group, and I'm so glad that he is able to have a out front role here today. So we continue this conversation with our extraordinary panel that we've brought here with regard to the commercial development of space habitats. We understand we're at the very beginning of this, and so and so there are going to be any number of important conversations like this as we begin to tease out the issues of transitioning from the ISS, which is such an important piece of technology that has been an incredible touchstone in the history of human space development. And how do we go from this incredible craft, this incredible facility to a fully commercial capability in orbit? It is going to be an extraordinary journey for the folks that are on this panel and many others. So we're just going to begin to dig into this with our panel. And let me first introduce the folks here one at a time. I'm going to be very brief. However, I do encourage you to go to our website for the full bios. First, I want to invite in Dr. Erica Wagner, who serves as the Senior Director of Emerging Market Development for Blue Origin. She's been with Blue Origin for almost 10 years, and that's got to be very close to the beginning. Previously, Dr. Wagner worked at the X Prize Foundation as the founding executive director of the X Prize Lab at MIT. She holds a doctorate, a PhD in bioastronautics from Harvard MIT Division of Health and Sciences. So welcome, Erica. So I'm going to just bring everybody on here one at a time, and then we'll get into the conversation. Tej Bhatia is with Voyager Space, with 25 years of startup and strategic leadership experience at some of the world's biggest
Axiom Space.
I'm sorry, Axiom. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I apologize for that. He brings that some of the world's biggest companies and 3 investor-backed high-growth startups. Tej Bhatia leads revenue generation and future monetization strategies for the commercial development of space as Chief Revenue Officer at Axiom Space. Alex McDonald. Alex McDonald is the chief economist at NASA. He's been there for 14 years, and he's held a variety of positions, including senior economic advisor of the Office of the Administrator, and is responsible for key papers, including The Emerging Space, The Evolving Landscape of the 21st Century American Spaceflight. Adrienne Manguka, I hope I pronounced that correctly, serves as the Vice President of Infrastructure for Voyager Space, where he works on future capabilities development aligned with making humanity's venture into space permanent. Adrian held prior roles at Maiden Space and NanoRacks, and he holds an MS from the University College of London. So welcome you all. So just to get into this conversation, let's start with what has been working so well with the ISS, because that's really where we're our jumping off point. And this question I'm gonna first give to Erica. What has proven so helpful with ISS management and their structure that can inform the transition to private LEO facilities, such as what are the benefits of the extraction from the what can we benefit from the IGA, the ISS Intergovernmental Agency Agreement, for that matter. So I'll let you respond to that if you could, Erica.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'll take a swing at that one. First of all, we wouldn't be, I think, where we are in the commercial LEO destinations program today without the legacy that ISS has built. It's been such an important platform in building up not just our technical capabilities as a nation and a globe, but also starting to lay down the foundations of what these markets can be and can do. So I think it's really important that we are standing on the shoulders of giants as we move forward. And I think that the IGA has been a particularly interesting piece of that, right? The ISS partners learned early on that they needed to establish a framework that didn't just solve the problems of engineering and operations, but also how to govern the station and the collaborations that were happening globally. A fully commercial space station is unprecedented. The main dimensions of ownership and regulatory governance and jurisdiction are really some fascinating problems that we're going to be moving into solving in this next generation. So it's something that we're solving not as individual providers. This is not Orbital Reef's problem to solve, it's the community's problem to tackle. And it's, I think, one that's going to be taking a lot of time and a lot of hard work for us to get into. Mm-hmm. So the IGA is really interesting in a number of the pieces that it solves for, a number of the agreements that came together across this community of space agencies. Export control is one that touches on us every day. The ISS is essentially an ITAR-free zone, which makes it a really interesting use case for how we think about a future of operations on commercial platforms that are really going to be serving a global market. Agency to agency barter is also covered in the IGA. And I think that's a really interesting one for the commercial LEO destinations programs. And Phil's team is really got a lot to think about. NASA's still considering whether it's going to be the broker for agency to agency transactions and offering exchange of LEO services to partner agencies as a tool of diplomacy and one of collaboration. So I'll let Phil speak to the kinds of budget plus-ups he's going to need to be able to serve that market and buy excess commercial capacity for barter. But from a policy standpoint, we know that we're going to need a framework that takes over from the IGA to support that kind of intergovernmental use. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of more details we can get into as we continue the conversation. But at Orbital Reef, we're trying to learn from the IGA framework and optimize for commercial business, because as we move out of government ownership of this real estate, we're going to need new regulatory structures and new ways of international collaboration.
Yeah, that's a great way of teeing this all up, Erica. A couple of things. I do want to bring Phil into this conversation as well. He's a very important part of this. So if we can, Adrian, Arnie, if we can bring him in, that's great. And I want our other panelists to respond to or add to what Erica just said about kind of what's working, what we might be able to carry forward into a kind of new regime. I don't know if Alex, if you want to pick up on that, or Phil.
Go ahead, Alex. I've talked enough already.
Yeah, no, I don't really have too much to add on that. Just to really underline, though, that it's still early days, and we don't really yet know how best to knit together the international community in such a way, either through formal structures like the IGA, or to allow commercial companies to seek the market opportunities more directly. As you read your space news every week, there are new indications from international partners about the viability of which types of arrangements we will see. So I do think it's an interesting one to really look at deeply, and I think now that we're moving into an implementation phase, we're now at the rubber meets the road phase. It's not up to theory papers. It's really going to be about what really works for space agencies around the world and for new space agencies, right? It's going to hopefully be more space agencies than we had involved with the ISS that we will be seeing involved with future commercial LEO space stations. So now's a new phase. It's beyond the theory phase. It's the implementation phase, and it's both complex and challenging and exciting, as all of the companies here know.
And Tej, now Axiom, is a little bit ahead of the game, maybe a little bit ahead of the others in the CLD program. How are you starting to try to tackle these issues that Erica wanted to detail about, and is this something that you're giving a lot of thought to, and how so?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Steve, and I'll forgive you for messing up the company name, even though it's on my shirt. I was going to plug your book, but now I won't. But
No, I know. I'm always good for one blooper per call, so apologize for that. Go ahead.
Steve's book is great, by the way. So for me, I joined Actium 8 months ago, and I don't really have a space background. I've obsessed with it my whole life, but I have the luxury of working with legends from the ISS program, Mike Soffredini, Marilyn Dittmar, and a whole bunch of other people who I get to call my colleagues. And the way I see it is this new chapter, this new opportunity we have right now is not like a flip of a switch. Yes, the ISS has a finite life, and there'll be new commercial destinations, but it's not like that stops and this starts, right? This is the truest definition of a public-private partnership, and it requires many parties, governments, corporations, institutions, individuals. As you're going to see with our first mission, the AX-1 mission in a few weeks, it's so intertwined. And I don't think anybody in human history has taken on an endeavor like this before. And I know for a fact when I walk out of meetings that those conversations that I'm having are the first time in human history those conversations have happened. And it's true because there's never been a time like this. Those parties have never been in the same room together. And so I think Erica said it, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. It's not we're on their shoulders, we're with those giants right now. And we get to invent this. And it would be foolish to think that, hey, there's commercial and there's government. Yes, it's two totally different modes of operation, especially when it comes to business. But in terms of doing something that's never been done before, building the infrastructure, the foundational infrastructure that's going to take us to LEO and beyond, we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And Adrian, go ahead. Adrian, go ahead.
Yeah, I very much agree with the panelists so far, and thanks also to the Institute for having me. It's great to be here. I couldn't agree more on the importance of having a model for collaborative international partnerships via the IGA and the decades of work we've already done on the ISS. But I want to add that the ISS also serves as a model for service purchases exchange, right, between private entities on a massive piece of infrastructure with dozens of intersecting interests, governments, companies, a bunch of entities. And in this context, Nanoracks, a Voyager portfolio company, has been able to serve over 400 customers, has flown over 1,500 payloads from over 30 nations over the course of 12 years. And that would have been absolutely impossible without the presence, one, of that infrastructure, and two, without the partnership of NASA and governments globally. So really having that place to play commercial before the big leagues, where we all get to build it ourselves and figure out how to own and operate it and really build out a business model, that cannot be understated. That is a comp that we use to our investors every day to say, this is legit. We've done this. This is a real business model, and we know how to do it. And we're ready to do it on our own platform. So can't be understated.
Well, let's move on. Actually, Adrian, I'm gonna keep you on the floor here for a minute. Let's move on to the technical and the financial challenges that you're taking on. Because yes, as Phil said, NASA agrees to be your tenant, but they're not paying the full freight, and their business alone is not going to support your entire business model, right? So how are you approaching this partnership in a way that is sustainable and provides you an opportunity, you and the other players in the market, an opportunity for growth?
Yeah, that's an extraordinary question. I mean, I'll start by saying knowing how to do it and knowing how to do customer service is at the core of everything that I think we're all going to have to do over the next decade, right? I mean, I can't even pretend that it's a half and half question of technical versus customer service. We are building infrastructure, right, in order to serve customers. Our business model is not building space stations anymore, right? That's great. That's the big problem we have to solve, and that's incredibly important. I don't want to understate the challenges, the technical challenges involved with that, the life support, the pressure vessels, everything. That is a massive problem, but that's not why we're doing it, right? We are not a government contractor. NASA isn't paying us to build this thing, or else they'd be paying a heck of a lot more. They're paying us as an investor so that we as commercial entities can charge for services, high margin services for customers paying from around the world, whether it's scientists, tourists, or anything else. I mean, and that's what makes this so different, and wrapping our heads around that, on the investor side and communicating that to our investors, right? The guys, no one's paying us to build the highway. We're going to build the highway on our own, and then we're going to charge the tolls, right? That communicating that message is difficult. It's a challenge that I think we all embrace, and I personally love, and it forces us to think about investment in some new and pretty radical ways. I mean, like, think about it, guys. Like, when was the last time that the government came in, or we as a civilization kind of came together and said, let us make a civilizational scale investment? It takes decades to complete. It's a totally new market. As Phil said, we're going to create a market, and at the end of it, there's going to be a business. I mean, at no other point in history has that been the conversation, and it finally is. And I think there's some very good and important reasons for why that is. But I think that makes this moment in history extremely unique, extremely important, and I think that everyone on this call is going to have a big role to play, and I think that the future is certainly upon us. So, yeah, here's to that. I don't think I addressed a single challenge, but ask me specifically, and I'll get into it.
Well, yeah, no, you definitely have framed our potential here as well. But I think, I don't know, Erica, I mean, do you have any particular thoughts on how you're going to address the financing and developing an ongoing sustainable market for your services and facilities?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that the answer is, in many ways, we don't yet know with certainty any of the markets that are emerging. There is not a vibrant marketplace on the ISS today that is yielding ROI. Like, there's a lot of great things happening, and there's a lot of great demonstrations that are going on, but we have yet to have a company turn a major ROI on a payload, come back and buy a bunch more services on the ISS. We are still early in the days of market development. So we are betting on flexibility and scalability as being key to success of a business model. And we're building an orbital reef as scalable infrastructure, and it scales quite large. And we believe that there are a lot of opportunities here in business to government work, and not only, as Phil and Alex were saying, for the traditional ISS partners, but for the emerging space nations of the world as well, for business to business work, so that we're serving both R&D and manufacturing markets, as well as the sort of more consumer-oriented markets of media and advertising, and sort of more focused on brand growth. And we'll be serving business to consumer markets. And the idea of personal space travel is certainly one we've been learning a lot about with our new Shepherd product, and getting a lot of incredible market feedback and market data that shows us the potential here. It's a market that is uniquely sensitive to the reduction of costs. It's got some sort of unique elasticity, and uniquely sensitive to the experience growth and the reduction of risk that we're seeing in this era of space flight. So I think there's a lot of different pieces to it.
No, it is. So I'm just listening to you, this whole idea that there's a degree of faith, right, in terms of expecting this market to emerge over time. So obviously folks are there's a bit of a gamble here, and it's to the benefit, of broader society, whatever you want to call it. But I think as you attain reliability, safety, accessibility, and comfort level with potential markets, you could start to see that kind of growth that you're hoping for.
Yeah, I don't want to characterize it just as faith, though, right? And this isn't philanthropy. It's not blind. If you build it, they will come. It's that we see a lot of areas of potential, and we want to be flexible to respond to the ones that do emerge. But it's not just blind faith.
Okay.
Well, and actually, Steve, if I could say something and agree with what Erica just said and not agree with what she said prior to that in terms of ROI, some companies have turned a clean profit off of work on the ISS and managed to reinvest that into commercial activity. Once again, I mean, the Bishop Airlock is a commercial addition to the ISS, fully privately funded, wasn't a NASA investment. We didn't have, millions of dollars of investor capital coming into that. That was money that NanoRacks made working for commercial customers on the ISS. So it's not blind faith. I completely agree. Markets do exist. And I think there's a lot of pent up demand that all of our solutions are going to be part of addressing.
Adrian, I should have characterized that as end users. I certainly think there's been a vibrant marketplace for those of us in the middle.
Good. So you see, there's clearly the business case. So let me,
one thing I would disagree a little bit.
Tej, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing I would disagree is you said pent-up demand. I don't know if I agree with that. There's definitely a lot of potential. I think we're going to find out what kind of demand is there, and that assumes there is a market. And for me, as a chief revenue officer at a venture-backed company that needs to show the types of returns our investors expect in the next 7 to 10 years, I really hope there's pent-up demand, because that'll make our lives a lot easier. But I think we're going to have to develop this market. We're inventing it as we move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Steve, so I got to jump in. This is Phil.
Please do.
This is excellent. This is fun when we don't always agree. First of all, I think it's hilarious that that Alex wasn't the first one to use the word elasticity. That came from Erica. The economist did not use the word elasticity. And I would say when you characterize it as a gamble, I think maybe a lot of people in DC kind of reacted like, oh my gosh, that's every single business that ever started in America. I was part of a consulting firm. We did a lot of venture, private equity plays and all this. I didn't see one spreadsheet that had a negative at the end. All of these spreadsheets for all of these companies were like, we're going to make billions of dollars, millions of dollars, and very, very few of them played out. This idea that it has to be a sure thing, we have to get out of that mindset. And the way we mitigate that, it's a risk. And so we have to address that risk, but the risk mitigation is not ensure that this guy works or ensure that this company works. It's competition. We have seen that to be successful again and again and again. It not only incentivizes performance, but it makes the government not reliant on a single partner. So I think it's perfectly fine that this is a gamble, because that makes it just like every other terrestrial business ever. And I'll just make one more comment, and I can assure you, there is pent-up demand. When I was in my last company, we did a very, very comprehensive survey of high net worth individuals. We gave them not the pie in the sky thing. We said, it's going to take training, it's going to take money. You might throw up when you're on orbit, your back might hurt. You might have to go to Russia. Are you interested? And people were still very much interested. And it's not just within the space community. There is definitely pent-up demand. I think to your point, though, we're not clear if that pent-up demand is sufficient for you guys to make a profit, right? That's what we got to see. I totally agree with that. But I can assure you.
And that's where the faith comes in, I guess.
Yeah, there's surveys are always there's some uncertainty there, but there's definitely pent-up demand. Question is how big it is. Is it sustainable for a destination? Kind of New Shepard, it's a little bit easier, right? That's smaller, didn't take quite as much investment. You know, the price points are a little bit lower. For destination services, it's totally agree that we got to see if that market or that business case actually closes.
Mm-hmm. So let's actually, I want to bring Alex back in here. And let's looking at the ISS, and we know that there's the ISS National Lab component to that, and how does that How does that evolve as NASA sort of diversifies amongst variety of commercial habitats? Does it stay intact, or does it change? Are you looking at that question?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve, and you know, it actually is a really important subject that we haven't really touched on yet, although some folks' comments have actually implied the services of the ISS National Lab, which are really quite significant. And it goes a little bit to this question of what are the different market segments of activity that we can come to expect. And we had a bit of a good discussion and debate, and clearly, as you'd expect, amongst a number of competitors and amongst a number of government bureaucrats, you wouldn't have an agreement on what the future would look like, because if we did, then we would all have perfect information, which we know we don't. But the idea of mitigation is an interesting one that Phil raised. How do we mitigate, you know, appropriately the chances that you know you're going to see demand not emerge sufficient, right, for a commercial space station? And having demand from NASA is one that Phil's program is kind of really on the hook to characterize. We've already referenced the demand for potential international partners, which there's still some uncertainty around, but currently NASA has a role with the International Space Station, TBD going forward. But there's other market demand segments too, and it's important to note that you know, tourism is not necessarily a market demand segment that a space station is needed to fulfill, as in fact a number of suborbital vehicles have shown, as Inspiration 4 has shown. If your goal is simply to go to space, you don't necessarily need to go to a space station. And so why do we have a space station, right? What do we do with the current space station? One of the important things we do with it is we do fundamental research. We do fundamental biological research. We do fundamental physical sciences research. But we also do applied research in technologies. And we have recently even begun to reinvest in an area that we actually engaged in commercialization of long before you know, any of the kind of recent 2000s era activities, but in space production. Actually an activity that goes back at least to NASA's Centers for the Commercial Development of Space in the 1990s. And in the 2010s, we actually reinvestigated that area, found that actually, even though NASA had kind of stopped investing in it significantly in the kind of mid-2000s, that actually a number of companies had emerged that began using in-space production techniques to really just kind of show what might be possible. And we've now seen an acceleration of that. And one of the, you know, more interesting examples that folks might be aware of is ZBLAN, which is kind of went from obscurity to a somewhat well-known acronym within the commercial space community in a relatively short period of time. And it's basically an exotic fiber cable that it has potential higher bandwidth transparency than our current fiber optic cables. And there's some niche applications for DoD activities, et cetera. What I think folks may not realize is actually that there are ongoing prototyping experiments going on of ZBLAN production capabilities on the ISS right now, and it's not by one company, it's by a number of companies. There's been a real growth in this area, and one of the key enabling factors behind this has been the ISS National Lab. And the ISS National Lab, for folks who aren't familiar, very briefly, is a legislatively designated function of NASA that is managed by a managing entity, CASIS, which NASA enters into a very particular public-private partnership to allocate 50% of all of the research resources on the ISS. So that is, on average, 50% of all the cargo mass, 50% of all the crew time. That amounts to a very significant amount of resources. We're talking hundreds of millions of resources that are currently provided essentially free of charge to American companies to be able to use the ISS for research. And so right now, activity that goes through the ISS National Lab, companies don't need to pay for it. If they have applied for the ISS National Lab research resources and have been approved, they don't need to pay for that. However, in the last few years, we introduced something new, which was a commercial pricing policy, which is a recognition that eventually, over time, in a truly commercial space station, companies are going to have to be paying the full cost of their activities. And it's another complicated area of debate, right? What is the right amount to be charging and at what time? And as Phil can tell you, we've received some specific, you know, legislative report language that indicates what Congress thinks about some of these areas. So it's all evolving a lot. And the last thing I want to say about it, though, is that there's also one other piece of really exciting legislative language that we've seen emerge from the Senate Commerce authorization side of the House, which is language indicating the desire for a report on a future microgravity national lab that would be managed as an FFRDC. And that's a really incredibly important and exciting idea, because that's very different than what the National Lab is currently. What it actually implies is something a little bit more, I would say, exciting, which is something like a JPL for microgravity research. Because the only FFRDC that NASA has is JPL, and it predominantly does robotic spacecraft activities. But that language in that report implies that there is such a national need for continued advancement of microgravity research that there may in fact be the need for a permanent new institution of federally funded research and development that may have a critical role to play in this. And I think that's the type of new institutional activity that we really need to think about. We do need to study it. It's not obvious that that's the answer. But I really do think it's an important piece, because we do have to think about all the different segments of demand. I personally believe that research, science, R&D applications are going to be a critical, important part of the overall portfolio of demand and revenue. And NASA and the federal government still has an important role in doing the supply side push up to a point of some of those technologies, when at some point we hope that they can become commercialized in actual productions in space. Where, last piece, it's important to note, we still do not have any examples of things that are produced in space so regularly that they are then sold at a profit. We have services, right? But the in-space production activities are still something we're searching for. And it'll be exciting to see how the next few years play out, because the ISS is still the core where we're doing that.
I think Erica has something to say to that. Thank you, Alex, for great overview. And it sounds like it's a critical issue that needs to be addressed as well. So, Erica.
No, I think Alex points out something really important, which is that we've traditionally in this country really aligned and fully thought the Venn diagram was overlapping between space and NASA, where increasingly through the leadership of the ISS National Lab and other programs over the last few years, we've seen growth in other government agencies. So this idea of an FFRDC that would help to manage gravitational science and research and development is a really interesting one, especially if it starts to approach what's going on in space as a sort of whole of space. It's not just about one platform, it's about all the things that are going on, and whole of government. So not just NASA, but also the various other governmental agencies that have reasons to want to see continuing growth, continuing US leadership.
Yeah, and just a great point, Erica reminded me that actually, that language is in a bill that is talking about an expansion of the mission of the NSF to include a whole new research foundation function there. And currently one of the single largest users of the ISS National Lab resource capability from an other government agency perspective is the NSF. They do multiple calls annually through the ISS National Lab, doing their own fundamental research. And that's the kind of stuff we want to see grow in the future.
Mm-hmm. Very good, very good. Let's leave that conversation there for the moment. In a couple of minutes, I do want to start taking questions from the chat field. So please do, folks, put your questions in there. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But we have a very interesting question that came up during our prep call, and I wasn't really thinking that we would add this, but several of our panelists felt that this was important, and specifically, there's a persistent public criticism that commercial space is all about billionaire vanity rides, right? We've all heard that. So, from your perspective, the panel, how do we address this misconception head on? What's our response to that?
Hey, Steve, I'll take this one.
If you can, Tej, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no problem. First, just want to acknowledge how incredible a time it is for us to be alive, and for me personally right now to be here with all of you and to jump in and field this question. It's amazing for me. When the question came up and you sent it to us, I first want to question the question. So is it the misconception that's feeding the headlines, or is it the headlines that are feeding the misconception? And I think it's the latter, and it's doing a major disservice for everyone. And how we address the issue is to recognize that the existing narrative about the joyrides, about the billionaires, is clickbait, and it works. It gets the clicks, it gets the views. And what I believe we need to do, all of us, is provide the press and the entire world with a much stronger narrative. And we need that narrative to point out that this is a new chapter for humanity. It's a chapter that's not zero sum, and it's one that requires all of us, governments, corporations, institutions, individuals, to work together to get it right. And I think at the end of the day, history is not going to paint these people who are going up as billionaire joyriders. It will paint these private space explorers as the pioneers of this new chapter. And the argument quickly, when you talk to anybody about this, spirals into, why are we spending the money up there when we have so many problems here? And my answer to that has always been, it's space and Earth are not mutually exclusive. They never have been in our history, and they never will be in our future. So we just got to change that narrative. And what I can tell you from our work at Axiom and our upcoming mission, AX-1, which is the first civilian crew to the ISS, is that we're working with all those parties, governments, corporations, institutions, and individuals to move humanity forward. And that doesn't mean in space. What we're doing up there is benefiting us down here, and we'll continue to do that. And I know all of us on the panel feel this way. So I'll just, I'll leave it at that. And I appreciate the opportunity to reframe the narrative as something more important than just clickbait.
You're here. Phil, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. You said Adrian, right? I don't want to, might have talked over you.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying I don't know that I would call it clickbait. I mean it's the zeitgeist, right? It is reflective of the fact that we live in unprecedented times, where great wealth also engenders great inequality, and that is real. These are real issues. I get these questions from people who are very smart, right? And the news sure reflects that. But I think what this does more than anything is give us an opportunity to hold up a mirror to ourselves and our industry. And some of us have been in this industry all of our lives. We've been, reading science fiction all our lives, and we see this fantastical world ahead, and that's wonderful of equality and resources and opportunity. And that's great, but for people who don't see what we see, who see the development of the technology, who see the cancer-saving drugs potentially being invented on tomorrow's space stations, or the eye lenses being printed, or the new seed strains being figured out to help make crops more climate resilient, I gotta say that I get it. I get the concern. The most visible thing are big rockets going up, making loud noises, and people floating around and coming back down with really cool stories. So the question, and I totally agree with you, Tej, the question that we got to ask ourselves is, how do we change that narrative? Because that narrative both exists, and I think we need to start off by saying it's valid, and it's okay that it's there, and we have to meet it honestly and openly and with curiosity, and by welcoming folks into the conversation. The thing that I've found to be really effective is to say, listen, you and I both agree that helping the world become a more livable, equitable, just, prosperous place for all humankind is a worthy goal. That is the thing that we are both working toward. And just like I don't invalidate someone who wants to foster pets instead of fund a school, they can't invalidate folks that are trying to work to make science in space, work for the betterment of life on Earth. You have your way of helping the world, and I have mine, but gosh darn it, our goals are the same. And ultimately what's behind all of this is, as you suggest, an attention, a civilizational attention that has been dragged in the wrong direction because of real conditions that exist on Earth today, that hopefully all of our work is going to get to addressing here pretty soon. So I want to say that.
Very good. Who wants to take another crack at that? Phil.
Yeah, I'll just say, I wouldn't want to elevate any motivation above another. It's kind of what Adrian's saying. Being able to satisfy someone's lifelong dream, that's pretty good in my mind. That's a pretty good thing to be working on. And I know a lot of people's lifelong dream it is to travel into space, see the curvature of the Earth, see the blackness of space. I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't think it's frivolous. It's a pretty cool thing. And if I was in a company like Erica's or Virgin, where I could achieve someone's lifelong dream, whether you think that's trivial or not, I think that's a good thing, honestly. And then another way that I would answer it is, this is just the first step. All of these companies that are involved in this space commerce, they have long-term goals. You know, Elon's goal is to make us a multiplanetary species so that we don't get an extinction event. That's a pretty long-term, saving humanity. I think we'd all agree that's a pretty cool thing. Jeff's vision is to move heavy industry off into space and keep the Earth as sort of this pristine, almost park-like setting. That's a pretty good goal. You got to start somewhere. And this space transportation, getting there is the first step. And yes, it's going to be expensive, but every mode of human transportation starts out expensive. If you think 50, 60 years ago, not many people could afford a transatlantic flight, airline flight. And today it's within the means of just about many, many more people than it was 60 years ago. So they always start out sort of exclusive with the wealthy, but then business people, entrepreneurs come into the market, you see competition take effect, and you see prices come down. And that's, I think, all of our hope is that that will also occur with human space transportation. So that would be my answer. I think it's kind of, I think it's inappropriate for some people to say it's worth it for you to spend this money on this, but it's not worth it. It's not appropriate for you to spend your money on that. I just think that's a very, I don't know the word, but I just don't think that's appropriate. I spend money on a lot of frivolous things, probably more potato chips than I should. I like Lucky Charms. Maybe I should buy something, you know, some granola or something like that. But everyone has a choice and use their own money. And I don't think any one is necessarily worse than the other. But the things that we are achieving and the things long term that it could lead to, I think we could all agree that those things are good. And then just lastly, I'm sorry I've taken too much time. I got all the time up front. I really want to leave this short time. But space travel for a lot of people is a transformative experience. A lot of our astronauts, not all of them, they come back with a different perspective than they had before they flew. There are no boundaries from space. You see this thin blue line of the atmosphere protecting us from solar radiation and meteoroids and things like that. And you see how fragile our home planet is, and you come back with this feeling of connectedness that you didn't have before. If more people felt that today, of all days, when we've got what's going on in Ukraine, I think that would be a good thing, that we all feel this more connected feeling, wanting to take care of our home planet, not necessarily seeing the borders as being as important as it was. I see nothing but goodness from that.
No, that's so great. Frank White somewhere is smiling, I'm sure, to hear you say that. Erica, Alex, we are starting to, our time is so limited here, unfortunately, but Erica, Alex, you want to make a short statement about this before we go to questions? Alex?
Sure, yeah. I'll just say, so I think everyone's covered a lot of good ground here. I'll just note that, you know, historically, there have been a lot of questions about the value of sending any humans into space, right? And one of the ways in which, you know, we as a federal agency who have been doing that for decades have addressed these public concerns, which I think, to Adrian's point, have a certain level of legitimacy, because you cannot, you know, tell other people how they feel about things, is that we have demonstrated returns based on this activity. We have conducted research that has been made open and public to industry, to society, to advance knowledge. And I think that general approach to ensuring that we are also genuinely advancing knowledge, that we're doing it in a way that is open to the public, right? That is a way that we have been able to maintain sending humans into space at all for, you know, at this point, well over 40 years. And I think there's something to be learned from that overall as we think about the new ecosystem that we're building based on commercial capabilities, because of course, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
And I think that if we keep focused on that change and the vision we want to see, and Blue Origin talks about millions of people living and working in space for the benefit of Earth, right? And this is not about running away; it's about creating opportunities. And I think what we're focused on right now is making sure that we're bringing down the costs, we're bringing up the access, and that more people can see themselves in space. Our New Shepard flights over just the last year have already had the 2 youngest and 2 oldest astronauts, the first openly gender non-binary astronaut, the first parent and child flying together, the first. I think we're seeing a lot of doors opening that allow other people to see themselves in this.
And Steve, if I can, we got to get, I know, to audience questions. That's critical, but I lever off the comments just made. A reminder to the audience that there are literally thousands of space ventures out there today. It seems like every day in the trade press, another one emerges, quite diverse, contributing their own niche to this developing ecosystem. Who knows how many be successful, but arguably in classic fashion, the economy, these the Bezos and the Musks and Branson and so forth have created these bow waves. And in the wake of that, we have a level of robustness and vitality that for those of us who've tracked this for decades, it's stunning. So I'd like the person who made Tej, when you made reference to the clickbait, this may be more pedestrian and that lends itself to clickbait, but it's extraordinary what's the elements of this ecosystem. So anyway.
Thanks, Courtney,
Yeah.
for voice of God there from Courtney. I actually, and wonderful comments from all, and I do want to try to get some questions in from our fantastic audience. And here's one. I think you all may know Laura Montgomery, and this is for Erica. Erica mentioned that the ISS is an ITAR-free zone. I was wondering what statute for regulatory regulation exempt, what regulations exempts the ISS from ITAR?
Yeah, and so ITAR free is it's a little glib, right? But it is the nations that are engaged in this have identified a lot of carve-outs in which the usual amounts of concern of international interaction don't apply. So I think that I'll leave it maybe to Alex or Phil if they want to get into the nuances of it. But it is functionally a much less restrictive environment for export control.
Anyone else want to comment on ITAR? Let's see.
It's a very fast way to get people running away from you, Steve, asking anyone if they want to comment on ITAR.
Yeah, really.
When we need him.
Let's see here. Let me see here. So I have a question from hold on one second. Question here is from Tom Murata. What are things that you could do in a commercial platform potentially, that you couldn't do, that you can't do right now on the ISS? I mean, have you thought that, has that been an issue or discussion topic? Maybe Tej or Adrian?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the answer is in the question, a commercial platform, right? I think, earlier I described what we're doing as a new chapter in humanity, and I pushed back a little bit on the pent-up demand. I know Phil said it also, but I would still say that's pent-up desire, right? And there's definitely potential, but I'm hesitant to say there's a market. I'm hesitant to say there's an industry. But why would I join Axiom now? Having been a startup founder, having a lot of business experience at big companies, it's because I see the opportunity to create that commercial platform. And I mentioned that we're all building foundational infrastructure. If you think about the internet in the early 90s, and you think about kind of the big companies, Amazon, my former employer, Google, Alphabet, and what they built, and what we think is their primary, or at least their visible business, is subsidized and supported by gigantic platform businesses. I'll use Amazon Web Services as an example. All of us right now on this Zoom, every time you call an Uber, every time you watch a Netflix, you binge a Netflix series, Amazon's making money because they built the foundation for everyone else to then go experience their potential. So while I'm trying to build $1 trillion company for us, I'm trying to build a platform that enables multiple $1 trillion companies and markets and industries. So I mean, maybe I just harped on that question to answer my own answer, but that's where I think the difference is.
Yeah, I'll step in here. I still disagree, and that's okay. It's good to it's good to find out what the friction points are. But I don't think it is exactly what we can or cannot do on the ISS physically. It is how we do it on the ISS. It is working in, Tej, as you suggest, a semi-commercial or public and private space, right? Where we can fly some things, we can't fly others. There are certain processes that we have to process customers through. And having worked for a company that brought over 1,500 customers to the current ISS, I'll say that even if those processes are hard, there are a heck of a lot of people still willing to fly. And that is enough to make at least one, maybe more. And actually, there are a number of companies that do commercial work on the ISS today, all over. Business cases actually close. That it's enough to make these business cases close. I will continue by saying that, and I attest to this because I've been in these calls for the past 5 years. For every customer that some of these companies have flown to the ISS, there are 2 or 3 that they can't fly. And there are reasons for that. Very good reasons, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you don't want to be flying advertisements and having astronauts hold up, Kentucky Fried Chicken and say it's finger licking good. That'd be kind of weird. It dilutes NASA's brand. And I don't, we agree that it might not be an appropriate use of national resources, but that demand exists, and we have rejected customers because of how we have to work on the ISS. So, I'm going to go ahead and put this one in the strongly disagree pile, but let's give it a few years and see what happens. But I'll be on the side of optimism here and say that the pent up demand does exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to agree.
Let me just say I'm an internal optimist as an entrepreneur, so I don't take my words as pessimism, take them as a challenge. Remember, I said trillion, right? Mm-hmm. So think of order of magnitude and multiple trillions. Top 5 market cap companies right now are all $1 trillion companies, many that didn't exist 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. So how do we all push ourselves to get to that level? So it's not a pessimism in saying, I do disagree, pent-up demand. For me to be successful in the time frame that I have, give me all the models you want, all the numbers. Exaggerate them, give me your top order of magnitude. It's not going to be enough for me. So we have to invent this. So I just want to say I agree with you in the opportunity, and I do agree. I know I said commercial. I use that pretty binary in commercial versus not, and you said semi. I think there's a new word. We're inventing something completely different here. I've heard public, private in some of our other dealings. But yeah, the size that we need to go to, if we're going on this was my first board meeting, I said, if we're going on the assumption that cost will come down, remember, we're venture-backed companies. Our investors have investors. There are time horizons in a very short period of time where we need to make not 10x, not 100x, 1000x types of returns in this decade, right? So 2 to 3 companies for each thing that you had to turn around to, put a T in front of that and multiple T's, and then I agree with you that the demand is there. Like I said, I hope it is. I hope it is. And I'm not saying it's not going to be there. I'll do everything. I think, all of us will do everything, and we have to together to get it there. And people would have said the same thing about the internet 20 plus years ago.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, Steve, I'll just say, in terms of the things that we cannot do on ISS that we could potentially do on a commercial platform, I would say there's 2 things that are constraining us right now, policy and financial, right? From a policy standpoint, there are certain things that we are not going to allow on the ISS. We have policy says, there's obviously the brain concern that got brought up by Adrian, alcoholic products, nicotine-related products. We have policies that constrain some of that. You wouldn't have those in a commercial space station. It would really be up to whatever they wanted to fly. Secondly, though, more importantly, is the financial thing. And Alex alluded to the pricing policy. We looked at ISS today and said, if we wanted to charge full reimbursement for what it costs to be on ISS, here's what it is. Those numbers are eye-poppingly large. And then only a very few businesses are going to be able to afford that and be able to be profitable. So one of the things that we are going to be able to do in commercial destinations, if all of our partners are successful, and I'm really counting on them to bring the cost down, just what Tej said, almost took my answer from me, is a ton of things will be available to be able to be done on a commercial platform because it will be cheaper. Necessarily, it has to be cheaper. And so there's just going to be a whole bunch of things that financially today are not viable, even with the free transportation that they're getting through National Lab. Most of that is research stuff anyway. It's not business profit-making sort of things anyway. So I see two things that are really going to help enable this business. And I'll just say one more thing. And somebody was telling me, well, Phil, what if this doesn't work? I'm like, well, what do you mean by doesn't work? We're going to get there eventually. And if there are no, even if there was no non-government customers, which I don't think anybody believes that's going to be the case, I still think it's in NASA's interest and it's the correct policy for our next platform to be private sector developed, owned, and operated, because it would still be cheaper, even if we were the only customer, just because of the corporate development business model, their focus on cost effectiveness, their focus on schedule. So even without that, I still think this is the right strategy for the United States and for the federal government and for NASA.
That's great. We have actually a quick question for you, Phil, from one in the audience. Are you open to additional partners in the CLD? Is that something we could see in the future? Is that something you're discussing?
Great question. So this first phase, we have the 4 partners that we showed you, but in the mid part of this decade, 2025, 2026, we are going to have a full and open competition for services. Mm-hmm. So that will be open to any and everybody that can come in. You don't have to be part of the current 4, gang of 4. Mm-hmm. I just coined that phrase. That's not a real thing. But anyway, so if you're interested in doing a space station, keep doing it. We will enter into an unfunded agreement with you. We're going to have a call for unfunded Space Act agreements with various companies so that we can exchange technical information and subject matter expertise, because we want a very healthy competition in the mid part of this decade for the services that we're going to buy. So yes, full and open competition. Any and everybody that can come. You'll probably still have to be a US-based entity. I don't see there's any way for us to get around that. But other than that, stay in the game, because we have, I've said this before, if things play out the way I hope, and this is not a guarantee and not a forward-looking statement if you want to use the private sector equivalent, but we plan to spend about $1 billion a year on LEO services, cruise services, microgravity services, volume. We should be able to have, and I think that's what we're going to set aside for purchasing NASA's requirements from this low Earth orbit destination. That's pretty damn good, I think, for a business to have that kind of market. And hopefully that's just your base market, and all the other business transactions are on top of that. So yes, yes, and yes.
That's fantastic. You know, we are running out of time. I have a I want to give you all. Well, actually, I want to invite, if you can, Arnie, I want to invite Courtney in here onto the call to give his some observation on what we've been talking about. And then I'd like to invite you all to make a closing statement. It may take us over the half hour, and hopefully you all just stay with us for that. So Courtney, what are your thoughts about this conversation we've had today?
Well, a compliment to the panelists. One metric is engagement of audience. And if the questions that have been generated over the past hour is any indicator, you have really engaged people's attention. And I think have really remarkably, well, given who you are, I'm not surprised, but have really, I think, covered the waterfront of relevant issues. And just really as a down payment, I think, Steve, on a number of things that we need to engage as an institution in the months and years to come. I'm not an agent for Alex McDonald, but I couldn't resist putting in the chat his remarkable book. And Tej made reference to Steve's The Obligation. So if you're interested in the philosophical, spiritual, but in terms of an economic history of commercial space, he takes you back to John Adams. Amazing as that appears, it's an extraordinary history, and it demonstrates how many of the things that we've been talking about really are very much part of the DNA of this country in so many ways. So you'll find if you have a chance to read his book, and again, I put it in the chat, many of these issues really are consistent, I would suggest, Alex, with the history of this country when it comes to new sectors, new economies, new markets, as Phil referred to earlier. It's very consistent with any of the major pioneering sectors that we've been associated with. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah.
And I think, Alex, you and I have promised each other, read each other's books, so I will do that. So I think in wrapping up, I think certainly I want to give you an opportunity, any closing remarks, but also this question, where do you this is a big plan. It's going to take a decade to come to fruition. How are you approaching this in the next coming weeks and months, to sort of get the traction in and bringing this all together? You've got wonderful images, what the concept drawings are fantastic, but how do you start to get beyond that, both from either technically, from a policy standpoint? How do you take those next steps and what do they look like? And I'll start with you, Erica.
Yeah, in the spirit of ending on time, I'll say we're hiring. We are scaling our team rapidly. We are looking for customers. If you'd like to come join the Orbital Reef, please reach out. We've got a lot of opportunities for all sorts of folks.
Mm-hmm. But in terms, just to expand that a little bit, in terms of working with other competitors, other partners in the market, working with NASA, working with agencies, any thoughts?
All of the above.
All of the above. Okay. All right, Tej.
Yeah. So, in terms of us and developing, we have a little bit of a head start. We are actively building our module. Thales Alenia in Italy is doing it for us. I've seen it. It's phenomenal. You'll see it go up soon. We have our first mission going up in a few weeks. So it's real. This is happening. Hiring is a good one. I think customer development. And I realized before when I was making the argument about trillions, I don't know if you guys remember the Facebook movie, the Justin Timberlake character who was like, what's cooler than a million? A billion. And I just one-upped him. What's cooler than a billion? A trillion, multiple trillions. But it's what I believe is needed for this. And yes, cost, I hope, will come down. But another way to bring cost down is fractionalize it and create the innovation in the business models and the financing models, where I think that big public-private partnership will help. It's not about cost on the customer side. It's about price or value. And in terms of payment, there's financing models that can make this much more realistic in a short period of time than we've seen ever before in history. And then I'll just do my wrap up now. Courtney opened this with the right time. There's a moment in every single major inflection point from an investment standpoint, whether that's internet, mobile, the gig economy, where you can look back and point to and say, why now? And I think this call is a perfect example of it. Phil's interview with Courtney in the beginning is a perfect example of it. It's very clear that the time is now. So it's not, will it work? It will, for sure. How it will work is yet to be seen, and that's why we're all here.
Fantastic. Let's do Alex, Adrian, and then Phil.
Yeah, so as a DC denizen, right, still working here in the bureaucracy, right, one of the things that's been enabling for this was actually essentially a joint policy statement that came out from NASA, Department of Commerce, and the Department of State that was submitted to the Space Council now a few years ago. And in that document, effectively, it was stated that it should be national policy that we have a continuous U.S. citizen presence in low Earth orbit. And not necessarily the U.S. astronaut, right, but that there should always be a citizen in low Earth orbit. And that as a policy goal, a policy statement, I think is really important. I think it's been one of the many pieces of enabling paperwork, so to speak, behind the CLD program. I think it's one of the pieces of enabling, intent behind also ISS extension. And I think just to kind of, knowing our audience here, to paraphrase, Benjamin Franklin a little bit, right? What we have is a commitment to a permanent presence in space, a permanent indefinite presence in space if we can keep it, right? And I think that's really important, but it's also something to keep an eye out on the policy side for all those folks who act on that side and not necessarily on the commercial market side. There's important work to be done there as well in ensuring that we hold true to that intent and that policy goal.
Excellent. Yeah, there's no certainty, of course. Adrian?
Yeah, Tej really said it, that the time is now, and the time is now because the conversation is happening, and the most important indicator about a time to act is this fascinating thing called the collective consciousness begins to shift. It starts buzzing and getting excited, and action, collective action, one of the most difficult things to affect in a civilization, in a government, people, becomes possible. And so that collective action that we can take in concert with commercial industry, with our customers, with the government, and really, as a country, is possible now, and we have to act. In terms of solving these impossible problems that are ahead of us, I mean, I guess my view is really you take an impossible problem and you break it down into its minimum constituent problems, its minimum parts. And the part that's really before us today on our team is really continuing to serve the hundreds of customers that we already have. It is perfecting that customer service, and because those customers that exist are at the heart of why we're building this thing. What it looks like, what the hardware is, that's great. It's very important. It's beautiful. It's going to be cool. It flies. There are spaceships that go there, and that's all wonderful. And it's going to have windows and so on and so forth. But nothing matters more than the customer experience. That is the fundamental unit of everything we do. We're serving them now. We're scaling them up. We're scaling them out. And that's really what our focus is going to be on these next few weeks and months. As our technology development progresses, we're never going to forget about our customers. So,
and thank you, Adrian. And Phil, you get the last word.
I don't want to belabor this too long. People have heard me talk too much already, but I will say the last thing that I will say is, like Alex, sometimes you can get a little bit ground down being in DC, but seeing these unbelievably smart, committed people on the panel with me, and probably everybody that's listening in, really re-energizes me to tackle what is going to be a lot of challenging problems. But I'm not doing it alone. I'm doing it with this community. These people here on these panels are all super smart, super dedicated, super committed, and it's just giving me a warm fuzzy, and I'm going to go attack my next problem with a little bit more vigor. So thank you to the panelists today. It gives me a real shot of adrenaline.
And with that, thank you all, Erica, Tej, Alex, Adrian, Phil, and of course, Courtney. Thank you. I just want to, send you off. This conversation is continuing. As I said, we're at the very beginnings of this process, and we're at the beginning of the process for the CLD, the Commercial LEO Destination Program. But I like to think that we're at the beginning of a whole new stage, and I think as articulated earlier, we're at the whole new stage of the potential for human growth and expansion into outer space. That we will see right now, maybe the record is 14 or so astronauts in space at one time, people in space at one time. What Beyond Earth is interested in tracking that growth over time. So we're interested in seeing how that's going to go from 14 to 24 to 52 and so forth, and see that grow over time as these facilities come online, as the markets develop, as people feel comfortable, reliable, as price comes down, and it just becomes a space, as so many people have said before me, is just a place after all. And that's why we're so excited about this initiative. And we will be following it very carefully. Beyond Earth Institute will continue to work with these organizations to help support their activities from a policy standpoint in any way that we can, and to help this become successful. Even though there's no guarantees, we're we anticipate we'll do what we can to make it a success. So with that, I thank you all, and I thank our attendees. This program is recorded, so you'll be able to see it on our YouTube page shortly. And again, Beyond Earth exists. We are a nonprofit, a 501c3 organization. We do rely on donations, so we do encourage you to go to our website and donate generously. And so we'll look forward to seeing you at our program next month. We'll be at ISDC on May 27th. And of course, as Sean mentioned, we've just confirmed that we will be hosting a full-day symposium in DC in conjunction with the University of Arizona on October 13th. And you'll be hearing much more about that as that evolves and that program takes shape. So again, thank you all, and have a great rest of the day. And thanks again to our panel. Bye now.